All right, we'll begin here in Philippians chapter 2, but depending on how the pages are in your Bible, we'll actually go back to the end of chapter 1 to give ourselves some context. The verse we read and a couple more. Philippians 1, beginning in verse 27, "Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. So whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have." So Paul has told us here at the end of chapter 1 to let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel. And then he begins to unpack that idea a little bit more as he starts chapter 2, first of all by saying, okay, you begin doing that by thinking like Jesus. And so at its very core, what we learn from that is you are able to change the way you think. If you think to yourself, I'm a negative person, this is just how I am, I'm cynical about life, whatever it is, you are capable of changing. And if you're going to find something to change toward, then the example we want is Jesus. And we talked a couple weeks ago about how Jesus saw life in a way that was selfless, in a way that was humble, and in a way that let loose of the things that he had all the right in the world to grasp onto. And then last time we talked about shining like lights, which is to say, in a world that is dark, and Jed actually talked about this a little bit on Wednesday evening even, there's the darkness around us in our world that a lot of times we will kind of get frustrated about, and we will want to change. And for a lot of us, we may remember a time where we feel like something was better than it is now. We had our trunk or treat out here last night, and I will tell you that most of the kids came through, were excited and thankful. You know, some of them had to be reminded by their parents to say thank you. A lot of them were just shy and didn't want to say anything. They just held the bag out and wanted the candy. There was one little girl, and she was not one of our church members. I have no idea her background or anything like that. I don't think she was with an adult even, but as she came through, she hit kind of late in the evening. And when we first started out, we were giving out 3 pieces of candy, at least at our car. We were giving out 3 pieces of candy at a time. And then we started to see bigger crowds show up, and we thought, okay, we're going to have to go back to 2 pieces. We're not trying to be cheap, but we're going to go back to 2. And then as the night wore on and we got closer and closer to 7, and we were just trying desperately to get through after borrowing some candy from Thorin, and I think from the Duncans also, because we were run out, we got to where we were just giving out 1 piece of candy as they were coming through. And so this girl, I gave her a mini 3 Musketeers in her bag, and I saw her as she watched me. You know, I kind of had it in my hand, and I dropped it in the bag, and she looked down at the bag, and she said, 1 little piece, kind of cheap, and then walked on. And I thought to myself, okay, first of all, she's right, but that's not the reaction I was really looking for. I just, be thankful everybody went to the trouble and came, and we don't even know who you are, but we decorated our cars, and we're trying to make a connection with our community and all that stuff. And I thought, there was probably a day where people didn't do that, but at the same time, there was probably a day where people would have thrown eggs at your house if the light wasn't on to giving out candy, and there was a day when everybody walked around the neighborhood instead of being dropped off every third house by their protecting parents, and I've been one of those, I understand. But times change, and the world around us has become more dark in the process, and a lot of the values we had are not the values people have anymore. And so we can look at that negatively, which is what we generally do. We kind of get up in arms about it, we get frustrated. Or we can look at it the way Paul looked at it in the middle of this chapter, which is, if it's really dark, you can shine. I went outside last night hoping to see the northern lights. I know it's supposed to be further than north than us, but hey, you never know, maybe. But all the neighbors had their lights on. I thought, well, even if I could, I wouldn't be able to see the northern lights. When it's dark, you can see things. You can see the light that comes. When it's all bright around you, it's harder to see. And then what we'll look at tonight, this morning, here in the end of chapter 2, he says, okay, all of those things are fine, but I want you to consider these examples. As we talked about as we started, all these books with all the information, they have everything you need to know, but maybe if you could see this in front of you, it would help you out. And so as we go through this context, I want you to think of this in a couple different ways. One, I believe you truly, if you have any relationship at all with Christians, you have some of these examples in your life. Maybe not one person that is all of the things we talk about, but different people that are different pieces of it. And then secondly, I want you to think a little bit about the need for us to be that example for other people. Because as you have that and you've benefited from it, there can be other people around you that can benefit from seeing that in you. So we're going to do it this way. We're going to ask the question that Paul answers a little bit at the end of chapter 1, and I think we'll answer in 10 ways in what we're going to look at today. What does a life worthy of the gospel look like? Because it's one thing to say, go live lives that are worthy of the gospel. And it's another thing maybe even to try to spell a little bit of that out. But what if we could see that in action? What would it look like? And I think we see it here in the people of Timothy and Epaphroditus. So starting in verse 19, Paul says, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon so that I too may be cheered by the news of you. First of all, in the life that is worthy of the gospel, we see people that have a meaningful connection to others. And I will tell you that that is a challenge for a lot of us. Because if we were a church of 75 people, my in-laws church up in Ogallala, Nebraska, is a church of roughly that. I would guess somewhere between 60 and 100, depending on where they're at. They're actually growing. They're doing a lot of good things. But when you go to church there in Ogallala, Nebraska, if you're a member of that church, if you were not there this Sunday, someone knows. Now that, I think most of the time is the case here, that someone knows, but maybe not everybody knows. There, pretty much everybody would probably know. Or if you had come in, Brent Lowe came in today, and I said, welcome back. And then I said, you were gone, right? And I knew Brent was gone, but I was second-guessing myself already because there's a bunch of us here. And what if I'm wrong about that? Now I've offended Brent because he's like, well, actually, I was here. I was just sitting over there. But he was gone for a little while. So I said, welcome back. If you were in Ogallala and you were there and you weren't normally there, people would immediately know you're a visitor, that you are not part of the normal church family there, and so they would rush to meet you and maybe even overwhelm you a little bit with that, but they want to know who you are. For us, sometimes, have you ever had that experience? And I haven't had it as much here, but I had it a little bit in Searcy, where we were a church of 800. And every now and then you would introduce yourself to someone who'd been there for 30 years. And they were on the other side of the auditorium somewhere, and you didn't see them all the time. Or maybe they're balcony people, and you're floor people, and you didn't see them all the time. And so because of that, you have a little bit of that disconnect. And so what Paul says is, if we are Christians, if we're part of the body here, we're going to have this meaningful connection. And so when he sends Timothy, he knows Timothy is going to be meaningful to them, but also he shares the joy that Timothy brings to him. And so what you see is not a, hey, how's it going? Good. How you doing? Good. And then move on to the next person. There is something there with a little more depth to it. And I'm as guilty of this as anybody, because it's hard to have meaningful conversation with 250 people as they pass you in the foyer. Now, at the same time, a lot of you are connected by family, and so maybe you have that connection, and it's hard to go outside of that. But in the church, we find there is this life that we are living that is worthy, that's defined by meaningful connection. Then he continues on. In verses 20 and 21, he says, for I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare, for they all seek their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. And so secondly, we have people who have a genuine concern for others. This is what Timothy shows in his life. And notice, by the way, the language Paul used about the interests of others. Exactly the language when he talks about how to think like Jesus, to consider the interests of others over yourself. Timothy is someone who is showing that in life. This is what it looks like to have the interests of others ahead of your own. Now, for most of us, we probably know people who are like this. For most of us, I hope we want to be people that are like this, but it's a struggle sometimes because our self-interest, we're kind of geared that way. And quite honestly, there's a biology about us that is geared that way. Survival of the fittest. You know, it's one of those things that we are looking to survive, and it has been ingrained in us for so long that we feel like, well, my interests are important. And you look out for number one. That's the way we put it in America nowadays. Or you are going to constantly be making sure to put yourself ahead, and the way people do that oftentimes is by pushing others down to step on top of them and move forward. And he says instead here, be like Timothy, put the interests of others ahead. And the way you do that, the way he describes Timothy, is a genuine concern. And I wonder, how many people do we really have a genuine concern for? How many people, even in the ones that we help, are we just trying to do enough to pacify, trying to do enough to be helpful in some way, but not really genuinely concerned about, well, what happens next? Where do they go from here? And so Timothy has this genuine concern. Bonhoeffer describes it this way in his book, Life Together. Says, we must be ready to allow ourselves to be interrupted by God. God will be constantly crossing our paths and canceling our plans, by sending us people with claims and petitions. We may pass them by, preoccupied with our more important tasks. But it is part of the discipline of humility that we must not spare our hand where it can perform a service, and that we do not assume that our schedule is our own to manage, but allow it to be arranged by God. You ever been too busy to do good things? You ever been so caught up in the schedule of what you have to do that you forget about the thing that needs to be done or the person that needs to be helped? What I see in Timothy, the way Paul describes him at least, is that if he is on task for something else, he has the kind of concern for other people that says, I can set this task aside for a little while and see to this need and help someone else out. He continues in verse 22 this way, but you know Timothy's proven worth, how as a son with a father he has served me in the gospel. So we also see that a life worthy of the gospel is one that has proven worth and service. People again and again have proven themselves to be who they're going to be. And by the way, if you have ever disproven this in life, it's hard to regain that, isn't it? When you have messed up the trust, when you have done the thing that is not the way you want to be, it's hard to let loose of that tag. Oftentimes people will think of you more as the one who lets people down than the one who gets things done. And you have to just over and over do the right thing to gain this reputation. So if this is the reputation that Timothy has, then this is who he is. And this is who we want to be. And the way we get there is not just for it to happen, it is by what we do. And so again and again and again, we prove ourselves by what we do. And by the way, not for the sake of proving ourselves. I don't get from any of this that the reason Timothy is doing this is so he can have this reputation. Timothy is doing this because this is who he is. And so Timothy proves himself by serving and by being concerned and by loving others. Verse 23, I hope therefore to send him just as soon as I see how it will go with me. And I trust in the Lord that shortly I myself will come also. I have thought it necessary to send you Epaphroditus, my brother, and fellow worker and fellow soldier, and your messenger and minister to my need. So we also see in both of these guys that there is an activeness that is going on, especially as he begins to describe Epaphroditus. How does he describe him? And we have very little about Epaphroditus in Scripture, by the way, just here in chapter 2 and then later in the book. He describes him this way. He is a worker, a soldier, a messenger, and a minister. And what are all of those things? And I will defend minister here, by the way. All of those things are active things. They are things that are being done, things that are happening. They are not just, as we've talked about throughout this book, they're not just showing up. They are worker. There is a task, there is a job, and Timothy and Epaphroditus both are the kind of people who do these things, make sure they're getting done. And then also he is a soldier, okay? There is a fight that is to be fought. There is a difficult road ahead, and he is going to be the one to take that on. And then as a messenger, he has, at its very core, he has a message to share with others, and we do too. We have a message to share with the world around us. And then he is a minister. He is taking care of the needs of others. For he has been longing for you all and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill. And this maybe is where some of the separation takes place, because maybe we've understood a lot of these things and are good at a lot of these things, but this is where there's a little bit of a struggle. He yearns for the church. Now, I will tell you, quite honestly, one of the first times I really remember feeling this way is during all of the COVID stuff. As I, week after week, would stand in my office with my phone on a tripod, trying to preach to it like it was people. And by week 3 of that, had actually printed off pictures of some of you out of the directory and taped on a board around my phone so I could at least be looking at people. And I won't tell you who they were, but they were all happy, smiling people that stay awake. And they were all around my phone here, and I'm preaching to them in their pictures. I will tell you that by about week 3 of that, I was yearning for you people. I wanted to be back together again. And I've noticed, looking back now a little more, really have it focused there, that sometimes when I'm gone for something, I was gone for a couple Sundays in a row back in September, October, September, the beginning of October, not long ago. I found myself by the end of that just ready to be back. And some of that is my family, and I miss them, all of that, but everybody gets that. But there's a piece of that is here too. It's nice to worship with other people and remember there's brothers and sisters around the world, but there's something about your church family. And as much fun as you may have on vacation or at the lake or wherever you're at, or as much not fun as you're having, like Epaphroditus, or when you're ill in a way. There is a yearning for the church. And I will tell you, the church as a whole, not Southwest, but just churches as a whole, struggle with this a little bit. Because every church you ever will go to, that I'm aware of at least, if you were to pull out their church directory and you were to count the people in there, and then you were to look around yourself on a Sunday morning and count the people there, what you find does not equal yearning. At least not from everybody. Now, maybe from some of the folks there is, but it's not yearning. I have to make an announcement about what we're doing with prayer at the beginning, because I know there will be 70, 80 people that are not here tonight. And I will tell you, if there is yearning, you want to be here. If there is yearning, Jet's class is packed on Wednesday nights. And I will just assume, for benefit of the doubt, they're all watching online because they can't be here. I know that's not true. There's a yearning to be together, but even more than that, because it's easy for me as a minister to want to see the pews full and to make it all about when we're here together. This is not life worthy of the gospel. This is an hour of your week, or 3 or 4 hours of your week if you're really committed. Life worthy of the gospel happens once we leave this place. And when we are outside of here, are we still yearning for one another? I'm not talking about the time when we get together and look at the back of each other's head, but in life, are we yearning to be together with other Christians? Are we yearning to do life together? Because that is the church we find described at the beginning of Acts. They are not people that are yearning for a time to be together so they can sit and look at the back of each other's heads. They are doing life together all the time. They are so involved in each other's lives, they know when there is loss, they know when there is struggle, and they know when there's rejoicing. And they're all part of that together. And I understand, by the way, that it's not practical for us to have that with 200-300 other people. If you've mastered that, come show me how that works, because that will be handy in my line of work. I have not mastered that. I don't understand how that works. But at the same time, I know that if you are here, once you get outside of your actual family, into church family, there are another 5, 10, 20, 30 people here that you could do life with that would benefit all of you. That if you were to build that kind of close relationship together that he is talking about here, these are people that, for Paul, for everyone around him, Epaphroditus and Timothy are not new names for them. There is a relationship that is there. And so we yearn to be together. Then he continues on in verse 27. Indeed, he was ill, near to death, but God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. When we are living lives that are worthy of the gospel, we are living lives that trust in God. Epaphroditus, we don't know exactly what it is, but is dealing with the kind of illness that death is even a concern. And yet he trusts in God through that. And Paul trusts in God as he is watching his friend go through that. And the church at Philippi is trusting in God as they hear about this person who they love going through those things. Do we trust in God when struggles come our way, whether they're physical things or health things or spiritual things or whatever they may be? Are we having a trust in God? Because if we are, that is part of living lives worthy of the gospel. Then in verse 28, he says, I am the more eager to send him, therefore, that you may rejoice at seeing him again, and I may be less anxious. Living lives worthy of the gospel brings peace and comfort to the others around us. So Paul is comforted by knowing of Epaphroditus, and he knows that the people who are there at Philippi will be comforted and have peace brought to them as well. Do we bring this into the relationships around us? Or do we bring chaos and worry and fear and anger and other things? And too often I worry that maybe we bring the wrong things to the others around us. There is so much fear and chaos and anger in our world today. That's the darkness that we talk about. What we need to be bringing is the opposite of that. And we can be good examples of that to others. And if, by the way, you are surrounded by people that are not bringing you these things, let me encourage you, one, to be someone who does this, but two, to seek out these people in your lives. Find the Timothys, find the Epaphroditus, the Epaphroditi, I don't know how you say that, the Epaphroditus in your life, and find that peace and comfort that God intends for you. Then in verse 29, so receive him in the Lord with all joy and honor such men. These are the people that are worthy of honor in our lives. These are the people that are worthy of honor in our churches. Now, what's funny is the world of darkness around us, what do so many of those people seek out? Honor. They want glory. And the things they do, sometimes they're driven by finances or sometimes they're driven by other things, but so much of it comes back to They want the pat on the back. They want the recognition. And Paul has told us all throughout chapter 2, one, when you're doing things the right way, you're giving the glory to God, which is our whole purpose in the first place. But two, when God is glorified in this, he will be the one who exalts, and he will do it later on when it matters. But then third, the way you really get honor is not by pushing yourself to the top. It's not by trying to get ahead. It's not trying to be recognized. It is when you are living this kind of life that is worthy of the gospel, then honor will come your way. And then for us as a church, there's a good reminder here that we need to honor folks who live like this. I don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't think it's in the world's terms. I'm not talking about trophies and plaques, all of that kind of stuff. But when you see people who are doing the right things, recognize that. Point it out. Send them a card. Give them a pat on the back. And let them know that the things they are doing are worthwhile. And I think what you will find in that is people that are reminded, yeah, this is what we're to do. And someone has actually noticed that this is a good thing to do, and I'm just going to keep on keeping on doing these right things. Then in verse 30, we'll bring it all together. For he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me. And maybe this is the pinnacle of it all. We have to do difficult things if we're living lives that are worthy of Jesus. And I don't know what that looks like for all of us, but I do know this. Getting up on Sunday morning and coming and sitting down on a pew and putting up with a sermon for however long it takes, even though that sounds difficult on its surface, it's really not. I guarantee you that for those of you who are in a job that involves meetings that should have been emails, you will have a meeting that's more difficult than this sermon sometime this week probably. A meeting that will make you wish you could fall asleep in it and still have your job and everything be okay. We have to do difficult things. What is that? It's the world of darkness that's around us and looking different than that. It is the times where people will try to push us in a direction we know we should not go, and to stand up against that, but to stand up against that in a way where we can still show love to them. Kind of complicated, isn't it? Because when you stand against something, what do you normally do? That's defiant. That is forceful. That is, and I get that there's a time for some of that, but we don't want to mess up our influence in the process because we're living lives that are worthy of the gospel to shine as lights. And if we look like the darkness around us, even if we're doing the right thing, we have missed the boat. So we have to do difficult things as followers of Jesus to live lives that are worthy of the gospel. So the question for us this morning is, are we doing it? Are we living lives that are worthy of the gospel? Because it is important to have followed Christ. It is important to have repented of your sin and confessed his name and been baptized into him. But once you get past all of that, are you living a life that shows that day in, day out? Not just when you're here, not just when it's the Bible class answer, not just when you're surrounded by other people doing the same things, but day in, day out, are you living a life that is worthy of the gospel? And if you are, we thank God for your example. You are the Epaphroditus or the Timothy in our world, and we need you doing that. If you're not, I will ask you to do what a lot of us need to do, which is just to step up. We need to do the things that we know to do and live in the way that we know to live. If you have never begun that walk yet, you can begin today. You can repent and confess and be baptized, and your life can be one that is worthy of the gospel of Christ. Or if you have been there in the past, and you have allowed the darkness of the world to take over or to make you bitter or angry instead of the things that we need to be, you can come back to him today. And whether it's by coming up front here today or going back to the back and speaking with one of our elders back there, or if you just need to have a moment with God where you pray to him and ask for forgiveness to be like you were before, please respond to the invitation in some way this morning as we stand and sing.